Hello and welcome. As part of the leadership series, I'm talking tonight with Mitch Pearlstein. As I just told him, it's about time I had this man on. Mitch is the man who founded the Center of the American Experiment back in 1990. He is known as a conservative head of a think tank, which the experiment is. And I'm looking forward to asking him all kinds of questions and learning about him. He grew up in New York.
Correct.
Went to undergraduate school at SUNY.
Binghamton, yeah. What was then Harper College is now Binghamton University.
Right. Came out here and got your PhD in educational administration
Correct.
at the U. You served under both Reagan and Bush with the U.S. Department of Education.
Correct, for a couple of years.
A couple. But working with both is
Well, in the
is
administrations, neither one called me on a regular basis.
You weren't sitting in
I wasn't
the
sitting in on
Oval
those
table.
meetings. I was
Oval room.
good friends with Bill Bennett, though, when he was secretary. And most importantly, I played touch football with him, so it was good.
Oh, that is more important.
Much more important than anything having to do with policy.
You've been an editorial writer and columnist at the Pioneer Press. He was a special assistant to Governor Quee and wrote a really neat book about him that
Well, he's a neat guy.
he is an
He's a
amazing
magnificent
man.
He's a
Yes,
magnificent man.
amazing man. You were a research fellow at the Hubert Humphrey Institute of Public
For a
Affairs.
short time, yeah.
He was the assistant to Peter McGraw, who, as most of you or many know, was the president of the University of Minnesota.
I couldn't hold a job now, could I? My goodness.
I'm starting
Went
to
from
wonder
thing to
here.
thing.
He's written several books, and he is married to an Episcopal deacon.
That's correct.
Whom I interviewed years ago when she was the head of a homeless shelter.
Diane McGowan, the Reverend McGowan.
Yes. Reverend McGowan.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Mitch.
Well, thank you. Great pleasure to be here.
As head of a conservative think tank, I'd love to have you define the word conservative, because it gets tossed around all the time. What's your best definition?
A preface here, I gave up the presidency about 6 months ago, 8 months ago.
Right, and you're now
after 25 years. So I'm still there. I'm very much full-time. I'm
senior fellow, right?
Senior fellow and founder, a couple of nice words.
Good words.
In there. But John Hinderaker, a terrific guy, is the new president. We all figured that 25 years was enough for one person to have his face in front of an organization like that.
But I'm glad you're still really involved.
Very much involved, very much involved. When we got started, and as you say, we opened up in 90, and I started thinking about this in the fall of 87, one of the first questions we had to deal with was, would we call ourselves a conservative think tank? And a lot of people thought that would be a terrible mistake. We would typecast ourselves, and people who didn't like such things would ignore us. But I was of the mind that you couldn't run away from it and didn't want to run away from it. The media were such that whatever we called ourselves, they would call us conservative. So I embraced it, we embraced it, and we wanted to redefine in the eyes and the ears of many what conservatism meant, at least what it meant to me. I have a friend who said before American Experiment, conservatism in Minnesota meant no taxes, no abortions, and I want my guns. We've expanded that definition, and it was no accident that our very first event was a full-day conference on poverty in April of 1990. People were intrigued that a conservative think tank would be interested in such stuff. For me, conservatism in large measure means that culture matters. Government is important. Government can do any number of things. Government cannot do, nor should it do, any number of things. For me, that is at the heart and soul of conservatism. Other people focus on more economic matters. They'll use the word inappropriately, so freedom a lot. For me, I use words like that. Free markets, without question, that's central. But if I were to pick just one theme that works for me, and I'm pretty idiosyncratic on this, frankly, it's that when it comes to educational performance, when it comes to family fragmentation, family breakdown, government can only do so much. It's what's in the very air we breathe that is really critical. We have to find ways of discussing that. We have to talk about religion, those tough things.
So family, culture, religion, all of these are things that you like to kick around and think about and
I'm
provoke
obliged. I'm
us all
obsessed.
to think.
Even if I didn't want to do it, I would have to do. We're all put on this planet to do different things. That's one of mine.
When you look back at your childhood, were you raised in a family where there was discussion at the dining room table?
Not much. Some, not much. My father would be much more inclined to do that than my mother, but my father worked in retail. So the number of times he was actually home at 6 o'clock for dinner or 7 o'clock, those times were limited, though my father had an interest in those kinds of things. I did enjoy, far more than was probably healthy for a kid, watching Sunday morning news shows and the
interesting.
like, reading newspapers.
So you became a political kind of animal early.
Yeah, I worked for Bill Buckley, for example, back in New York when he ran for mayor in 1965.
That must have been a wild,
I was
fun
17.
time.
Yeah, I was 17, and I handed out literature. I wasn't senior, I assure you. I just handed out literature. And my family, nice Jewish family from Queens, was hoping that that was just a phase I was going through, and no, it wasn't.
So were your folks Democratic?
Needless to say.
Most
needless to say.
New York Jews are. but-
Oh, my God, I grew up in a lower middle-class family in an overwhelming Jewish neighborhood. Republicans were, what's a Republican? Far and few between.
So where did your early, well, with Buckley,
Yeah,
for one example, are there influences that shifted you away from your folks
Yeah.
in terms of belief?
I did my undergraduate work, as you mentioned, at what was then called Harper College, now Binghamton University in upstate New York. This was in the latter part of the 60s, meaning Vietnam. And after a spell, I did indeed become opposed to the war in Vietnam and was a leader, though I would like to think one who was civil and not rude and not crude in opposition to the war. But many of the people who were opposed really thought the United States was evil. I viewed the United States as anything but we had made a big mistake. And when it came to some domestic issues, people on the left back then, during that era, particularly perhaps, viewed the United States as a hopelessly racist and unfair place. I did not. I knew that this was still a place for second chances and third chances. We did indeed have a rotten history in many respects, and nothing is perfect still, again, needless to say. But my conception of what this country was all about was fundamentally different than many of my friends and colleagues, fellow students back then.
As a young Jewish boy, did you face discrimination
Nope.
at all in New
Nope.
York?
Nope.
No. Good.
I think in many respects, a person finds what he's looking for. And I've always had this confidence that this was a fair place. I have never, from what I can tell, been turned down for a job, turned down for anything because I was Jewish.
Well, you've had some good jobs, as
I've had
I
some
just
good jobs. I
described.
think on occasion I've been turned down because I'm a male, to be frank about it. But I wrote once about how my grandparents and those before would be turning over in their graves, remarkably happy and joyous and amazed that we are as fair as we are in this country.
Do you think the conservative view since 1990 has changed much in our country? We're going through now, we're taping in June of 2016, a real kind of uproarious time.
Yes, I suspect if one is pointing to Donald Trump, and that means everything or a lot of things are different from 20 minutes ago. But if one doesn't assume that Donald Trump is conservative or is
Yeah,
my kind of.
how do you?
I don't like the man, frankly.
Well,
I don't know if this is the time to get into that, and I try not to publicly because American Experiment is a 501c3 nonprofit, tax-exempt educational institution, meaning by law the center can't get involved in partisan politics, and that's just great with me. We deal with policy, we don't deal with politics, and I've used that as a nice excuse to stay clear
well,
of
and
these
that
things.
is a
But
valid
let the
reason.
record show he is not my candidate for president. How's that? You know?
Well, and I guess I'm getting at more what he is doing, but not just him, but others who have strayed far from Alqui and Arnie Carlson, Elmer Anderson,
Right.
in terms of
Without question,
thinking.
the center of gravity for American conservatism now is to the right of what it once was. Does that please me? In some ways, yes. Other ways, no.
Give me an example of a yes and a no, of how it pleases you and how it displeases you.
I do believe that it is a good thing that we have more vivid views about what it takes to make an economy work, what it takes to make certain kids, poor kids in particular, get a good education. Here I'm talking about real life school choice. That includes tax credits or perhaps even vouchers. I believe it is a good thing that the United States recognizes it's a real tough world out there, and we are the world's greatest force for good. Where I'm uncomfortable, and this goes back to questions of style and tone, we've been talking about Buckley. I have modeled American Experiment in many ways after Firing Line, his talk show
Which
that was on
a
for decades and
great
decades.
show.
It was provocative. He was crisp. He certainly didn't lay over and play dead. He treated people with respect, and if they came out fricasseed at the end, so be it. But it was done with good manners.
Yes.
And that is what I have sought to do.
Sophisticated good manners.
Sophisticated and opposing political correctness. And that's another thing that is important for conservatives to do, to be strong, though not crude, in opposing political correctness. That's been at the heart and soul in many ways of what I've done, American Experiment has done, my colleague Kathy Kirsten has done, and others, is to challenge. We can talk about what do I mean by political correctness, but it's very important that conservatives have led the way, are leading the way on that.
Let me turn that right back
Sure.
to you. What is, in your definition, what is political correctness?
It's this assumption that what are known as liberal positions, progressive positions on various issues, particularly pertaining to equality, pertaining to race, pertaining to education, pertaining to any number of things, that liberal ideas are not just superior to those on the other side, but those on the other side, meaning conservative, they're just about racist. They're unfair. They're nasty. And implicit in many of the strictures made by affirmative action proponents is that this is a fundamentally not nice country. And that is simply not true.
I hadn't thought of it like that or quite like that at all, but feeling like that must make you angry, must make you, wanting
Sometimes.
to
Sometimes.
speak up, to
Sometimes.
fight back.
Sometimes, yes.
You had an editorial in the Star Tribune just a week ago. Again, it's 2016 June as we were talking, and it was so thought-provoking,
Thank
Mitch. And it was about affirmative action. Tell
In
us.
part.
In part.
Yeah.
Tell us kind of the premise, and then we can talk a bit about it. You will define it better than I will.
Yeah. Well, I've been living with affirmative action as an intellectual subject, as a policy matter, for a long time. It was the subject of my dissertation.
That wasn't in the article, was it?
36 years ago. I finished,
wow.
I finished it 36 years ago. And this portion of the piece, which dealt with a couple of things, built on an essay, very good essay, in a journal, which is a superb journal, City Journal, put out by the Manhattan Institute, about how Asian American students in elite institutions, the Ivies for the most part, need test scores and other qualifications to get in that are far superior to those of African Americans
that
and
are
Hispanics. Higher
in order to
get in, and also higher, much higher than whites.
Than Caucasian.
And what this is leading to, beyond unfairness for Asian American students, is that what we're really practicing now in those places is a kind of affirmative action for whites in opposition to a protected minority, Asians. So these are, I'm not saying these are easy issues, though I did come out on the side of we have to treat everybody fairly and Asian American students fairly, and if that means that instead of 15% of Harvard, 35 or 40% of students at Harvard are Asian, that's fine.
Your comparison to religion in the Supreme Court was really interesting.
Thank you.
Define that briefly.
Yeah, it's intriguing. Most people do not know. Most people don't think about the Supreme Court on a daily basis, that there has not been a Protestant member of the Supreme Court of the United States of America for half a dozen years. If the Senate approves the president's nomination
of Garland.
Of Merrick Garland, that would make it 5 Catholics and 4 Jews. It is fascinating to me that no one, for the most part, gets upset about this. It's an only in America kind of story about how there are no Protestants who represent a clear plurality of the American people. It says something very good about us, that presidents have not looked to questions of religion, and you should not look to questions of religion. There should be no religious test for just about anything. But it's so fascinating.
Well, when you
me.
juxtaposition that with looking at race
Yeah.
with academia,
Yeah.
there's a
Now,
very
these are the kinds of things,
thought-provoking
not
thing.
remembering the names of justices is not one of my great strengths. But these are the kinds of issues that I have been animated by for a long time.
Do you wake up in the middle of the night and
Sometimes.
have aha moments and say,
Sometimes,
oh,
yeah.
here's a way to reframe this idea, or to think about it differently,
It
to
happens.
educate
yeah.
people?
It's less in a general way. It has more to do if I'm in the midst of writing something significant. Then it will occur to me, and if I'm smart, I'll keep a piece of paper and a pen
Close
nearby.
to the bed, or
Because for the most part, I really don't want to get up. And I tested myself recently. I wondered if I could remember what I was thinking about as I was dozing off. I'm good at thinking of nice things dozing off. And I did. I was, for an older gentleman again, I was able to do that. Yeah.
So you write a blog routinely for
I try to get one piece
your
a week
website.
out. Yeah.
Just the process of writing has been interesting to me lately. I've been interviewing some authors, and do you find yourself sitting down on a Tuesday and saying, okay, today's the day to write it, or do you write it over a period of days?
It depends on the piece. As a former reporter, especially for a small newspaper, medium-sized newspaper back in Binghamton, New York, not only do you write to deadline, you write on several deadlines a day because you may be doing 2 or 3 or 4
So your
or 5
discipline
stories. So I didn't think I could write to deadline that way, and I had turned down this offer to be a reporter. This was back in 1970, 71. I turned it down a couple of times before accepting, but it was about a half dozen recessions ago, and I needed the job. And I found that I could concentrate and write fast enough to do it. So there are times now where I can write a 750-word, 800-word column without getting out of my seat.
Wow.
It doesn't happen all that frequently. I impress myself when I do it. I've written a couple of books over the last
Right,
number
quite a
of
few
years.
books, or co-authored some.
As I approach 60, I'm 68 now, I said I hadn't written enough books. I was going to write 5 between 60 and 70, and I have 4 down, and one to go. But that's a different kind of process where I would, if I was ready to write, sometimes you have to read and think before you actually write. But
That's always good.
That's a good idea. But if I were in the midst of writing a book, I would try to do 1,000 words a day. And,
Wow. That's a lot.
It's
That's a lot. That's
But if you quote a
5
lot of people,
pages.
if you quote a lot of people, you cheat.
Well, quoting helps. Quoting helps.
Yeah.
But so it really sounds like it varies depending on
Right.
the topic, depending on the length.
I don't miss deadlines. One way or another,
sure
I do
not.
not miss deadlines. My concentration is better than I thought it would be.
That's great. The center, tell us a little bit more about the goals. I mean, you've got some lofty goals. Just
My
run
goal
us
has
through how
always been
you.
to shift the intellectual and political center of gravity in Minnesota to the right. I'll let other people decide if we've succeeded in doing that. What I would say is we put some issues on the table that are consequential when it comes to school choice, giving low-income kids and families a chance to avail themselves of private, including religious schools. I think we've been the leading voice on that. We've been the leading voice when it comes to questions of family breakdown, family fragmentation being the new term of art. My last 2 books have dealt with that subject. We've been a leading voice in talking about religion in the public square, how it must be there and can be done the right way, fully respectful of the Constitution and American variety. We have been a leading voice when it comes to free market matters, the importance of having an economy that is less constrained by what government does and by rules and regs and taxes than is usually the case, that freedom works, free economies work, and I think we've been pretty successful in making those points.
And I agree. And I think you in particular, as a writer, have been very successful in being thought-provoking and not offending, while you do say some things that are not what others believe. There's something about your writing that...
I work at not needlessly offending. One of the things the center has done very well, more broadly, is when you think about it, with very few exceptions, we have avoided all unnecessary fights. Sometimes you have to do a bit of battle, but again, with civility. But we haven't had the knockdown fights that other ideological organizations frequently have. And I'm very alert to different constituencies when I write. The trick is to be provocative and strong, but at the same time respectful. I think
That word
I have,
comes-
if I have a gift, that might be it.
Yeah, I'd say that is a gift. You put on luncheons. I saw you're going to have a big luncheon in September.
Yeah, we do. We used to do one about every 6 weeks. We're doing about 4 a year now.
Okay, that's a big part of what you do. The writing, of course, speaking. Your people go out and speak all over, I'm guessing.
We have a bigger staff than what we used to have. And one of the good things is everybody who writes very well. And we are churning out good pieces, influential pieces on my colleague Peter Nelson, for example, about how great numbers of Minnesotans are leaving the state because taxes here are too high.
read some of his.
And it's not just a bunch of old guys moving to Florida when they're retired for the sun. It's much more serious than that.
we are getting the signal that we need to wind up already,
Okay.
Mitch. I want to give you the website, so if you'd like to read more about what Mitch has written, about some of his other writers, check out the website in terms of your goals, activities. Go to www.americanexperiment.org.
Thank you.
And you'll find lots of
We're there.
lots of information. Well, do we have a minute left? Am I close? In 1 minute, can you tell me, have you had a challenge that has driven you crazy in terms of being a conservative leader, and what is it? And we'll have to leave people without the full story, but
No, is the short answer. We had some disagreements in the office, but I wouldn't say that they were as substantial and worthy to be called intellectual battles.
okay,
And
good.
they're a decade ago, a dozen years ago. I've been able to write,
So
we've been
no-
able to do what I think we and my colleagues have thought needed to be
Not
done.
a lot of people can say that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Great.
for coming
Thank you,
down.
Mary.
Good
Great pleasure to see you again.
Thank you for being with us. I'll be back again next week. And check out Mitch's writing and ideas on his website. See you next week. Bye-bye.